exploring 12 real-life Fallout New Vegas locations? Let's go.
Welcome to JacobsTown, human. You're free to walk around. Just don't stare at the Nightkin. They don't like people looking at them.
Welcome to JacobsTown, or in real life, the resort on Mount Charleston. Hey, look. They even got the sign right. I mean, no, really, the sign's actually like pretty accurate to the game. But in real life, JacobsTown is not called JacobsTown. And it's kind of weird. It's split up into multiple different areas. Because in real life, this whole mountain, Mount Charleston, is pretty freaking big. And of course, you can't put all that in one game. So they kind of took a bunch of different aspects of Mount Charleston and combined it all into one. And we're actually not too far up the mountain. We can still go a pretty long way. And we will get to that here in a minute. But one thing you can find at the resort or the retreat is the JacobsTown Lodge. This little resort right here was the actual inspiration for the JacobsTown Lodge. And you can see a lot of similarities between the two. Similarities? I can never say that word right. So this resort started off all the way back in 1905 and kind of was founded by a man named E.W. Griffith. And for like 10 years, it didn't really do anything. But in 1915, that's when this area really started to kind of take off and became more of a campground. And for a pretty long time, it would stay in the Griffith family. And over time, it would naturally go between family and family, until in 1961, when a fire destroyed the entire lodge. And because we're kind of so far up in the mountains, it took the firefighters a long time to get here. And they eventually ended up putting a fire station up here, so in case something like that happens again, they can be quick to get to it. And of course, reconstruction would begin in 1962, the next year. And it would finally be reopened to the public in 1966. And from that point out, a bunch of new improvements would come and go. And after a couple years of name changing, eventually they settled on the name that it is now. After a little fire in 2021. This place is like a fire magnet. It can't help but catch on fire. Now, you might be wondering, Bald Man, why are you so close to the camera? Mind your own business. As I was exploring the lodge, I was pretty impressed with how close the video game came to real life, even down to the dried up pond out in front. But as I went inside, that's where I was really impressed. Now, the interiors aren't really that similar, but I did find two things that really surprised me. Number one was this pool table. The real life JacobsTown does have a pool table next to its bar. And if you explore around the video game version, you can also find a couple pool tables. But what really did it for me was this pinball machine. This old school pinball machine that's sitting right near the front of the real life JacobsTown Lodge, you can also find in the video game. Now in the game, it's hidden back in a room, but it's still pretty cool that there's a random pinball machine in the game when there's also like a real historic one in the actual lodge. Now I do not know if they purposefully did this, or if this just happened to be a coincidence, but this is my second time making a video like this. And if there's one thing I noticed is that when they were recreating the real life locations, they really did a good job with the little things from every single location. Now, by this point, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I can definitely see this looks like the lodge, but this doesn't feel like JacobsTown. And you would kind of be correct. Like I said earlier, this is a legit mountain, so they can't really just put an entire mountain in a game. You'd be hiking up it forever. So they combined the lodge, which is here, with our next stop, the top of the mountain, which is where you'll find the bungalows and a more JacobsTown fitting-esque background. Oh, and before we do that, I have to do this. Now, when you think JacobsTown in the game, you think of it more as like the top of the mountain and like its own little crater. This is definitely, this is more like it. Honestly, I've been to a lot of places, Hawaii, Japan, and many others. And this is up there when it comes to the most beautiful places I have ever been. So you definitely get the feel that this is where JacobsTown is supposed to be. Right up here, surrounded by mountains on all sides, plenty of pine trees, plenty of grass. I don't see any snow. Thank God, I'm from Florida, I don't deal with snow. But this is what I imagined JacobsTown in real life to be. Tucked away in a crater, surrounded by mountains. And like I said earlier, this is Mount Charleston. So let's learn a little bit about it. Mount Charleston is about almost 12,000 feet high, I believe, which is almost 3 miles to its tippy top. Now, right now, I think we're sitting at around 7,000 to 8,000 feet. Don't ask me what that means. I don't know. I'm not a geologist. I'm not a rock guy. To put that height in perspective, the tallest man-made building is the Burj Khalifa, sitting at 2,717 feet. So if we wanted to equal around how high I am right now, we would need to stack around 3 of those buildings on top of each other. So it's safe to say we're pretty far up. Now, Mount Charleston originally got its name due to Charleston, South Carolina. I know, right? Out of all the places to name a mountain out of, You name it after Charleston, South Carolina. But the native people that lived here before the white man came named it this. Now I can't pronounce that, and I'm not gonna pretend like I can. But that roughly translates to where snow sits. And if you do go to the top of the mountains in certain areas, you will see snow. Mount Charleston is actually pretty famous for its skiing and snowboarding and such.
Now, if you are coming to Mount Charleston to ski or snowboard, you're probably going to need a place to stay overnight. And that is where the bungalows, or the Mount Charleston cabins, come into play. This whole area has been around since like the 1950s, and are a very popular tourist attraction. And with this view, you can kind of see why. Now, the video game bungalows aren't exactly like a one-for-one recreation of the cabins, but the outsides do look a little similar. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't go inside the cabins because I didn't rent one, but just by looking at some of the pictures online, the real-life cabins are nice as hell. And if you were ever interested in staying at these cabins, the prices can vary from like $120 to $250 a night, really all kind of depending on what day you want to stay. So even though the bungalows in JacobsTown aren't an exact like one-for-one recreation, it's still pretty cool that they even added the cabins in the first place.
But a little trivia for you. While I walk back to my car and hope it hasn't been towed, because there's like surprisingly no parking up here. It's mainly all like residential areas, and there's some beautiful houses up here. But I believe in 1955, a Cold War era super top secret plane was actually flying around Mount Charleston, and it ended up crashing at its summit. And I believe pieces of that plane are still there today. And that plane was on its way to Area 51. So, you know, aliens.
Now, during the time of me filming this, I had no cell service at the top of this mountain, so I couldn't pull up my notes about this incident. But now that I'm home in civilization, I can. This accident happened on November 17th, 1955, and the type of aircraft that was involved was a Douglas C-54 Skymaster. This aircraft was completing a flight from Burbank to Area 51, carrying a crew of 4 with 10 extra passengers, mainly engineers and scientists who were taking part in the Lockheed U-2 reconnaissance aircraft building program. But due to the fact that this flight was super duper secret, the crew didn't have any radio contact, and en route to Area 51, they encountered very poor weather conditions, with active thunderstorms and low visibility. And while flying in the clouds at an altitude of 11,300 feet, the aircraft ended up hitting the slope of Mount Charleston, only around 50 feet below the summit, killing all 14 involved. And what's even more interesting or even eerie about this is you can find that exact aircraft still sitting there where it wrecked all those years ago.
See, I was right. Where are we? There. Between 7,000 and 8,000 feet. Damn, I'm good. But you gotta give Obsidian credit. Even though you can never really do to scale a giant mountain like this in a game, they did a pretty good job. Jacobstown does feel big. It does feel different from the rest of the Mojave. And it definitely does feel like you're on top of a mountain, but I mean, does anything ever compare to the real thing? The only real criticism I have of Jacobstown is that it's all the same color. That's really a really common complaint with all of New Vegas. There's not too much color out there. And when you come here, I mean, even if it was soaked in radiation, like, come on, at least give us a little bit more color. I can only do so many brown and grays in New Vegas before I have to mod it. And then that takes you down a rabbit hole. And then you end up modding your character with huge boobs for some reason. Every time, man. I'm just here on a mountain and just bought this brand new mansion. I read 1 book a day. So there was one thing I wanted to do on Mount Charleston that unfortunately I just don't have the time. Somewhere on this mountain, there's a trail called like the Eagle Pass Trail or something. I don't have any service right now, so I can't look it up. So editing me, put that in there.
Jesus Christ, past me, he's an idiot. It has nothing to do with eagles. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna continue referring to it as like Eagle Pass or something. It's called Griffith Peak. It has nothing to do with eagles. I'm so sorry.
And it takes you up to like the Eagle's Nest. It's not the Eagle's Nest, that was Hitler. Eagle Pass, Eagle Point, or something along those lines. And it's supposed to be like one of the tallest points of this mountain. And you can actually hike up to it. And that location does exist in game. Unfortunately, I'm only here for a couple days, and that hike apparently takes like 9 hours or something. I do not have 9 hours to spend digging up a mountain when I have plenty more to do tomorrow and the next day. So thankfully, we haven't seen any super mutants, no NCR mercenaries trying to haggle us, and no Grandma Nightkin, unfortunately. But we have brought the Legion's name to this mountain, and maybe one day, if this video gets enough likes, I will go all the way up to Eagle Point, or Nest, or that's not Nest, Pass, or whatever it's called, and I will plant a Legion flag at the top of this mountain. Mark my words. but unfortunately, I'm out of time. So our next stop is just below Red Rock Canyon in the Cons, the Spring Mountain Ranch. Welcome to Spring Mountain Ranch State Park, an oasis of green and an otherwise brown desert. I mean, look at that. You have all this greenery and flora. Look at that, it's a big word for me. Right next to these giant mountains. Now, unfortunately, it seems like the ranch and little watering hole and everything's closed. This is as far as I could get. Maybe I just came a little too late, I'm not sure, but I'll make sure to include a bunch of pictures. But this park in the game isn't really much. Really, the only reason you would ever go here is because you're trying to get to Red Rock Canyon. You can take the back way, but then you're fighting a bunch of Castodors. But the game's version is still pretty accurate to the real life version. Of course, the game version is a little toned down, and you have a burnt out ranch house instead of a fully built one, but you still do have this little pond, a ranch, and all this greenery around. So for a nice little state park like this, they did a pretty fantastic job. So I would say this location is pretty spot on to real life. Now, I originally wanted to go to Bonnie Springs, which is directly south of here. And funnily enough, Red Rock Canyon is literally just north of here. We're right in the middle. But during the time that they made Fallout New Vegas, Bonnie Springs was an actual town you could go to. It had a little motel and a bunch of other stuff. But of course, that was back in 2008. And I believe in 2019, editing me, fact check that, but I believe in 2019, they actually sold it, and you can no longer go there. And they're gonna build some kind of resort there. So that old historic town that you're probably seeing pictures of right now no longer exists, and it's gonna become something completely different, which kinda does suck. Because the Bonnie Springs in-game is pretty interesting. You have kind of like a destroyed little town in an open area with a bunch of vipers there. It's a pretty memorable spot. And I was really looking forward to whatever poop that is, and I was really looking forward to going there. But unfortunately, it's closed, and you can't get there anymore.
Now, we can't visit Bonnie Springs, but we can definitely learn about its history. Long before the neon lights of Vegas, this patch of desert was just a stop along the old Spanish Trail in the 1840s. And before that, it belonged to the native Paiute people, who eventually would move into the mountains once the Westerners started to move in. And in the 1840s, wagon trails heading west would pause here to water their horses. And even the explorer John C. Fremont camped by these same springs in 1846. Fast forward about a century, in 1952, a woman named Bonnie McGaw, later known as Bonnie Levinson, after a little marriage, ended up falling in love with the land and purchased it. She and her husband built a simple bar and restaurant, lit by kerosene lamps, no electricity. For like 12 years, this bar just ran on kerosene lamps. By the 1960s, Bonnie Springs was a full-on Western ranch getaway, with horseback riding, a small zoo, and even a diner that drew locals in, escaping the Vegas heat. Then in 1974, Bonnie opened Old Nevada, a replica 1880s mining town, complete with mock gunfights, saloon, wax museum, and even a miniature train for the kids. And for decades, it was a pretty charming town, a time capsule of desert history, where tourists could pan for gold or grab a drink at the bar after a trail ride. And of course, Bonnie herself became a legend, running the ranch into her 90s before eventually passing away in 2016. And that's when the modern Bonnie Springs comes into play. After more than 60 years of memories, Bonnie Springs closed its doors for good. All the old buildings that once stood there were cleared to make way for a new luxury community, the ranch at Red Rock, which construction was originally set to begin, but thanks to the whole pandemic thing, they had to wait a while, and they're just really kind of now getting into it. So that old style Western town is unavailable.
But we still do have half of the Spring Mountain Ranch. This ranch was originally called Sandstone Ranch and has been around since 1876. And throughout the years has gone from family to family to family until 1955, when a German actress called Vera Krupp, very similar to Vera Keys, actually bought it and renamed it to the Spring Mountain Ranch. And that name kind of stuck. Even after the state acquired it, they kept the same name and made it into this state park, which cost $15 to get into if you're not a local. Thank God they accept a credit card because I had no cash on me. So a little upset I couldn't go see the ranch and the giant pond in the back. And unfortunately, I'll never be able to go to Bonnie Springs and see what it was like when they were creating Fallout New Vegas. Oh, I can look at her pictures. But I mean, hey, with a background like this, it can't be too bad, right?
This is a dangerous place, human, especially for your kind. I suggest you turn back. There's nothing good waiting for you further on.
Welcome to Black Mountain. Or should I say, right next to Black Mountain, because that is in fact Black Mountain. I believe. I don't really have too good of service up here. But I'm pretty sure this mountain behind me is in fact the real Black Mountain, and this is just some unnamed peak. But in New Vegas, when you go to Black Mountain, you see this. And thankfully, as I was walking up, a super mutant sniper didn't shoot at me with a rocket launcher. That would have probably been the final straw for me. This hike is pretty brutal. Don't judge me, every day is arm day. But this entire mountain range that I'm on, which consists of many, many mountains, is called the Makalu Mountain Range. And this consists of Black Mountain, this one that I'm currently on, and this whole area. But I believe this is the tippity top and thus gets the name Black Mountain. And it sits at roughly, I think about 5,000 feet, so still a lot less than Mount Charleston. And this mountain range doesn't have a name, so therefore, since I climbed it with the flag, I get to name it, and this is now Caesar's Mountain.
So I'm still not entirely sure if this mountain was named before I got here or not. I mean, legally speaking, it is now named Caesar's Mountain because as we know, the law states that if you bring a flag to the top of an unnamed mountain, you get to name it. That's the law. I didn't say that, that's just how it is. But I really couldn't find too much information about this. I did find a news article from like 2 years ago that has an interview with a Mark Hall Patton, who was a Southern Nevada historian and the former administrator at the Clark County Museum. And even he states that this peak is unnamed, and talks more about how people commonly refer to this as Black Mountain just because of where it's at, what's around it, Fallout New Vegas, and all the radio towers on top of it. So according to that article, this is unnamed, but the trail leading all the way up here is called the Ardennes Peak Trail. So is this called Ardennes Peak? Ardennes? I don't know. Maybe it's just the trail that's called that? All I know is, if it hasn't been named legally speaking, it is now named Caesar's Mountain.
But what's pretty interesting is a lot of people mistake this mountain to be Black Mountain because of all the antennas and stuff that you can definitely see from down the mountain. A lot of people mistakenly call this Black Mountain, but it is in fact Caesar's Mountain now. And you can even go further up, but unfortunately you're not allowed to, or at least there's a gate there. But still, they did a pretty good job of incorporating the real life elements into the game. I mean, you got the radio tower that looks spot on. And really just besides hiking and all this radio stuff, there really isn't much about this whole mountain range. I tried to find some history about it, but I really couldn't find much.
Even being back in civilization and having access to unlimited pornography and the internet, I could not find really anything interesting or remarkable about this mountain. I mean, besides the views, of course. The coolest things I could find about it were one, the whole mountain range was basically formed from a volcano. Like a couple millions of years ago, a volcano bust, and thus you have Black Mountain now. The other cool thing I found was that researchers think that Black Mountain was like a regional ceremony center for Native American tribes. They would perform rituals, leave offerings, and seek visions from the summit. So that's all I really got that's interesting about Black Mountain. That and it's in Fallout New Vegas. One thing I did want to do was come up here at night because even when I was walking up here, I was like, I bet this night view is absolutely amazing. And of course, people have done that, and that's what you're seeing right now. So maybe if you do actually want to hike up here, try it at night if you're comfortable with that. Because some of these pictures look amazing.
And if you were actually wanting to hike this, it's not really too bad of a hike. It only took me about an hour and a half to get up, and I'm assuming it's gonna take me like an hour to get down. I'm a little lost. I haven't seen Danny Trejo anywhere on this mountain yet. Oh, hang on, I think I found it. It's so quiet up here, every step I make just sounds increasingly loud. I found Raoul's little slave shack down there. I guess that's where the super mutants were keeping him as a sex slave, or whatever they were doing. I'm not judging. And from all the way up here, you really do get a good view of just Vegas and everything around it. You really do get like a good sense of just how big this area actually is. You got the strip all the way down there. It looks so tiny, like you can even see the Lucky 38. But it's just so far down there. So we got the strip right here. And if you go this way, that would take you to Good Springs. Now, of course you can't see it because Good Springs is very, very far away. But that's also like Deathclaw territory and Quarry Junction and all that. And you can even see Red Rock Canyon from here. I'm not sure how good this camera picks it up. So if you're like a die-hard Fallout New Vegas fan, Black Mountain is probably something you would definitely want to check out, as long as you're capable of actually doing this hike. But if you're more of a casual fan, you can just stay at the bottom and see it for yourself, because it's really just a hike. There's not really much up here to do. but I still have plenty more locations to go to today. We have to spread the Legion's name all across the Mojave. And listen, I know the Legion's evil. I just think they're a really cool faction. And I'll make you guys a deal. If this video can get 20,000 likes, I will get the Legion Bull tattooed on me. And I will also fly back out here and record another video. There are plenty more locations that I'm not gonna be able to get to in my short trip here. And if this video does well enough, I'm already speculating on where to go next. And trust me, there's still a lot of really cool locations with tons of cool history. So saying that, I'm gonna run back down this mountain and then I'll see you in Hidden Valley in like 5 seconds.
I'd like a large atomic shake and a double Brahmin burger. And easy on the agave sauce this time.
This, you might be wondering, is Hidden Valley. Somewhere in this entire valley, the Brotherhood of Steel and our waifu Veronica are, and we have to go save her because the Brotherhood of Steel are evil. We need to get her out of there. Now you might be wondering, why does it have the name Hidden Valley? Well, that's pretty simple. We're in a valley surrounded by mountains, and it's kind of hidden. It was actually a little bit tricky to get here. This road that I'm actually walking on right now is called Hidden Valley Road, and you can even go farther in. But unfortunately, I don't really want to keep taking my rental car down these roads. You can probably understand why. Now, Hidden Valley is rather large, and it's pretty famous for a couple things: off-roading and guns. So on your way here, you are probably going to pass by tons of people outside shooting. And there are even a couple trails that you can go down that'll take you all throughout this entire thing. I think there's even a trail that connects this one to Black Mountain, and you go literally through the valley all the way out to Black Mountain, I believe. Now, you know how in New Vegas, when you go to Hidden Valley, there's like that sandstorm, and it makes it really hard to see and kind of traverse? Well, believe it or not, Hidden Valley does have that too. When I got here, there was a little storm going on down there, but unfortunately I couldn't get my camera out in time. So I'm kind of really just dicking around right now until another one happens. Now, one thing you might be wondering, where are the Hidden Valley bunkers? Those are where the Brotherhood of Steel are. So where are they in real life? Unfortunately, not here in Hidden Valley. As I was researching this video, I didn't know that, and I assumed that there was some kind of bunker out here. But I came across a website called the Lucky 13 Kate, and shout out to her on that website because a lot of these smaller locations I would have been completely lost about. And I came across that website, and it's been really helping me out a lot with the lesser known locations. And those bunkers, of course, are not here in Hidden Valley. It's actually a place called Groom Mine. And yes, Groom Mine, Groom Lake, Area 51, it always comes back to aliens.
Groom Mine is located in Lincoln County, Nevada, and surprisingly close to Area 51. The mine first opened in the 1870s and would continue running all the way until 1954. And from official records, most of the products from Groom Mine were lead. But what makes this mine so infamous is that during World War II, Groom Mine became surrounded by military activity, with it only being 38 miles away from the Nevada test site, you know, where they were testing nuclear bombs. And the Sheehan family who owned the mine at the time must have been living through absolute hell. Because not only do they have to deal with nukes just down the road constantly being set off, and them having to cancel and evacuate all the mining operations every time they decide to let one go, causing lots of structural damage, not only to the mine, but also to their own home. And with the possibility of nuclear radiation, this did not seem like a very fun place to be at the time. So they're dealing with bombs getting dropped, impacting their mining activities, but they're also dealing with the fact that planes keep bombing and strafing their area. In 1953, the property was strafed, and during the summer, a bomb destroyed the mine's mill. And again in 1954, the mining buildings were strafed by an aircraft. So it seems like the government really did not care about the people over here at Groom Mine. Now, the whole property where the mine is located has a nice little view of a certain airfield, known as Area 51. And in 1984, the US would seize a lot of land around Groom Mine, restricting access to the mine for the Sheehan family. And beginning in the late 2014s, the US tried to purchase the land, offering them all the way up to $5.2 million. And after the family turned that down, the government did what it always does and just said, well, we're just going to take it anyway. And they seized the mine under the Eminent Domain Act. And after back and forth lawsuits, I think they ended up settling on just $1.2 million. So if the Groom Mine is what these bunkers are based off of, and they look very, very similar, but I'm assuming a lot of mines had entrances very similar to this, but this mine has history, location, and a reputation, so I'm going to choose to believe that this is what they based it off of.
Now, what's pretty cool about Hidden Valley, not only can you shoot guns and go off-roading pretty much anywhere, like I don't think there's any rules out here whatsoever, but it's really close to Prim. I think it's only like a 10-minute drive if you have a better off-road vehicle than mine. And what's really funny is just south of here, there's like this little art exhibit. And at the art exhibit, it's just a bunch of rainbow colored rocks that just look like wee-wees standing in the middle of the desert. If you've ever seen Aqua Teen Hunger Force and you've seen the censored wee-wees, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I've been out here for like 15 minutes now, kind of really just waiting to see if like a little dust bowl will happen again, because I really want to get that on camera, but unfortunately, it's not really too windy. So I planted the Legion flag. Hidden Valley now officially belongs to Caesar's Legion. But I guess we should probably head out now, head to our next location to continue spreading the good name of Caesar. If you're a huge Fallout New Vegas buff, honestly, you could probably skip this location. It's kind of difficult to get to, well, more like a pain in the ass to get to, and there's none of those bunkers or anything, so you're really kind of just looking at more desert. So we're gonna switch it up a little bit. Instead of hanging out in mountains and deserts, let's go to a city.
Better be careful around these parts. I hear there's powder gangers around and dangerous for merchants like me.
So on my way to the next area, I needed to get some gas for the world's shittiest rental car that they gave me. So I stopped by Gene because it was relatively close and I needed to get some water. And I thought, even though I have shown you guys Gene previously, I thought we could go take a real quick tour around the town. But at Gene, there was once a casino called Terrible's Hotel and Casino, and it is absolutely destroyed. You can see right there, it's fallen apart. I didn't learn anything about Gene because I wasn't prepared to stop here, and I didn't do my research. So editing me in 1 second here is going to come in and tell you guys all about this casino and its history in this area. And what's funny, that abandoned casino is right next to the Gene Airport, or the Gene Skydiving, that you probably know it as, and a big old choo-choo train, and the NCR Correctional Facility, or just a prison.
Gene is a very nice town. Unlike its New Vegas counterpart, it's actually a decent size. It even has a Starbucks and a White Castle. And if you'd like to know more about this town itself, make sure to check out my previous video. I talked way more about Gene and its history. But I want to talk about the Terrible's Hotel and Casino, which was formerly the Gold Strike Hotel and Gambling Hall, and opened up in 1987, but was only alive until 2020. And it was your standard hotel and casino. It had 811 rooms and several restaurants, and was a nice little place to stop at on your way to the strip. And throughout most of this casino's life, it was known as the Gold Strike, all the way up until 2018, when the name of the casino was changed to Terrible's, which is the same name as the gas stations and convenience stores. And Terrible's was doing a pretty decent job until March of 2020, when it had to close down due to COVID-19. And the next year, it was announced that the closure was indefinite. And in 2022, the property was sold for $45 million to a real estate company, which unfortunately plans to demolish it and make way for an industrial park. Yay. I mean, seriously, looking at some of these old pictures of this hotel and casino, it looked freaking awesome, and I wish I could have gone to it in its heyday. And honestly, I'm kind of upset that a lot of casinos that aren't just on the strip are closing down. Even some of the ones that I went to when they were open and prim are now closing down. And looking at some of these old pictures of this casino and then seeing it in real life is pretty depressing. Now it just looks like abandoned property. Windows were broken, it seems like it's been through multiple fires, people vandalizing it, and it's in such a rundown shape that in April 22, filmmakers actually planned to shoot an action film on this property. The film was called Absolute Dominion and was set in 2085, where much of the human population were killed by religious terrorists. And the United Nations creates a martial arts tournament with the winner gaining absolute dominion for one faith. So seeing this casino go is kind of upsetting. I really wish I could have seen it when it was in its heyday. Like when they were making Fallout New Vegas, that's when this casino was in full effect. And it would have been cool to see them add this into New Vegas, instead of the Gene that we did get, which is just the skydiving.
Westside is a part of New Vegas, just as much as it's a part of the wasteland. In the end, stranger, we need them both to continue making our fate.
Westside not only exists in Fallout New Vegas, but it also exists in real life. And both in-game and real life, it's roughly in the same area. But other than the name, that's kind of where the similarities end. Walking through the real-life Westside, you're not going to be pointing out anything from Fallout New Vegas. It seems like they just took the area and the concept and made it into its own thing. Now, early in the game's development, the original name for Westside was going to be Doldrums. And the man who was working on it said that he envisioned a place where people who run out of luck end up and cannot escape their poor situation. Now, that name, of course, did not stick, and we eventually got just Westside. Now, I didn't really feel too comfortable filming too much around Westside. There was a lot of homeless people there, and I'm not too comfortable with filming people down on their luck. So forgive me if I'm not out walking the streets. But the real-life Westside actually has some pretty interesting history, and it has a lot to do with African American history. Now, in the 1920s, there were no segregation laws in this area that would bar black citizens from really doing anything. But during the 1930s, with the legalization of gambling, the repeal of prohibition, and the completion of the Boulder Dam, tourists started flooding in. And a lot of those tourists happened to be Southerners. So with the influx of all these tourists, new laws had to be put in place. Black people were allowed to entertain and work in casinos, but they were not allowed to attend shows or live in the casino district or obtain or renew business licenses. So in response to this new segregation, they decided to create their own area. And that area would be Westside. And for a long time after that, this area would see a very, very big boom, mainly in the 1940s and the 50s, where after black entertainers were done with their performances, they would head straight to Westside. And this would all last until segregation started to go away. And once that happened, the more wealthier people that lived in this area slowly started to move out to other communities. And also a lot of people would now prefer to work on the Strip because it offered higher wages. And in 1992, the Rodney King verdicts ended up sparking the West Las Vegas riots, which spread through West Las Vegas and resulted in tons of property damage and mob violence. And many years after that, there were many proposed plans to incentivize investors to putting more money into this area, but sadly, every single one ended up falling through. But there is one cool thing that you might see that you might recognize from the game, and that is this old abandoned gas station that is now a tire center. Seeing this, you might think that it looks awfully familiar, and you would be right. It looks very similar to the gas stations that you can find in Fallen New Vegas, mainly the El Dorado gas and service station. So it seems like the design for some of these gas stations that we can find in New Vegas were based on some old school real gas stations. Now nowadays this is a tire store, but it still has that signature look.
So Westside was kind of a letdown. I decided to come all the way out to Vault 34. And yes, I did already claim it for the Legion. And you might be wondering, this looks nothing like Vault 34. And you would be correct. Where I actually think Vault 34 is either that little mine way up there in the mountain, or directly behind what this is, and I'll get to this here in a minute. Vault 34, otherwise known as the Frenchman Mine. Dude, I don't know if you guys can see it. It looks like someone's standing in the mine entrance. If that is even the actual mine. Because as of today, this is all that exists of the Frenchman's Mine. Hey, it's Stitch, what are you doing here? So how do we know that this Frenchman's Mine is Vault 34? Well, for two reasons. One, they're in pretty much the same exact location. If you were to compare both the maps, Vault 34 roughly lines up with the Frenchman Mine. And the other reason is actually pretty interesting. Back in the 1960s, during the Cold War, the US government was getting a little paranoid that there was going to be a nuclear attack, a fallout, so to say. So Nevada was like, hey, we need to be prepared. So they came up with a list of designated mines and tunnels and caves that could be used as fallout shelters in the event of a nuclear war. And on that list just so happened to be the Frenchman Mine. So yeah, the Frenchman Mine, Vault 34, in real life was an actual fallout shelter.
Now the history behind the Frenchman Mine is rather interesting. This is allegedly what happened. In the early 1900s, there was a Belgian man named Paul Wedelet, who was trying to avoid Ohio because he had a warrant out for his arrest. Allegedly, I don't want to get sued here by this man, allegedly he had a company called the Colville Group Mining Company, and may have misrepresented the group's operation in order to scam some investors out of money, which was about $4,000, and transfer that to today, around $120,000 to $130,000. Now the warrant was made out to Count Paul Wedelet, and that's because he pretended he was a German count. So in order to make sure that he gets nowhere near Ohio, he headed out to Las Vegas. And at the time, Las Vegas was still a desert casino town. And Paul ended up claiming an area on the eastern side of Vegas, which today is known as the Frenchman Mountain. And it's around this time where him and a fellow accomplice would start up the South Nevada Gold Mining Company. And not too long after, around 1912, some businessmen happened to make their way to the area. And our boy Paul saw this as a huge opportunity. He ended up showing them samples and said that both gold and gypsum were plentiful in this area. And soon after, word would quickly spread that the Frenchman Mountain was home to a fortune. Until 2 days later when the local newspaper said, yeah, that's not true. But the damage at this point had already been done. Now you might be wondering, if this dude was a Belgian man that pretended to be a German count, why on earth is it named the Frenchman Mine or the Frenchman Mountain? Well, that's because people thought this dude was French. Apparently, he had an accent, and his name comes from a French-speaking part of Belgium. And he just never corrected anyone. People thought he was French, and he just went with it. Maybe because it seemed like he would be more trustworthy that way. So after all this interest about his mine starts to erupt, people start investing some money. And what do him and his accomplice do? They take the money and they just dip. I can't verify this, but I saw something that said some New York businessmen came in and purchased a portion of their company for around $500,000, which today would be around 15. And not long after this is when Paul and his associate ended up leaving Vegas. And 2 years later, the mine would come to an end. And to this day, no one really knows what was going on in this mine. Apparently, in the 1960s, mining experts were unable to find any evidence to support the idea that ore ever got shipped out of here. So that made a lot of people come to the conclusion that this entire thing was just a hoax to lure in investors. And really the only remnants we still have of this giant scam was the mill. And that's what all this concrete that's located out here randomly in the desert is. Apparently there was a mining camp that housed the workers that was also built here, but as of today, the Frenchman Mine Mill is the only thing left standing. Well, kind of standing. And I've seen a bunch of conflicting reports on where this mine actually was, if it even existed at all. But the mine that I keep referring to, I'm not quite sure is the Frenchman Mine. I've seen a bunch of varying reports about this, but one says that it was a mine from the 1970s that some old crazy woman used to live in. I've also seen other reports that say the mine tunnel was sealed shut after a young boy ended up disappearing while exploring the mine sometime in the 1940s, and the only thing that was found of him was his bicycle near the entrance of the mine. So like I said, tons of conflicting reports. But if there's one thing that's for certain, it's that this mine has a rather interesting history.
Now, as much as I want to go up into that mine, where I swear it looks like someone is standing out in front, I am not prepared to climb a mountain. I have no mountain climbing expertise. I am a bald YouTuber, and that mountain looks very high up. And just getting into this mill right here was a pretty big chore. There is so much glass on your way here that I was terrified I was gonna cut myself and then get like super AIDS or something.
Also, on my way to this area, I had a wild wasteland encounter. I ran into a random fridge in the middle of the desert. It seems like someone beat me to it because there was no hat or skeleton inside, but it's still pretty cool that I had my own wild wasteland encounter in Vegas.
So I guess that's where we can end off on Vault 34. The trail is just really janky. And there's helicopters constantly ruining things. Freaking rich people and their helicopters. I had to walk out here on my own 2 feet while I drove to the entrance and then I walked. But I can't see why this place is just covered in broken beer bottles and fireworks, because I bet at night when you can see the whole strip lit up from this view, it's gotta be nice, right?
Nipton was a wicked place, debased and corrupt. It served all comers, so long as they paid.
A little bit of a sidetrack here, but I do want to talk about Nipton. I did visit this in my previous video, so again, check that out, shameless plug. But I want to talk about it again because it just recently sold for $2.5 million to a company called Spiegelworld, which is an American theater company. And Spiegelworld stated that they wanted Nipton to become their new base of operations and will become a place where, quote-unquote, Spiegelworld artists and performers will retreat to dream, create, and undertake unfettered artistic experimentation. And I really wasn't sure what that meant, so I had to go do a little bit more digging. And apparently it means that they're going to build an art-directed luxury accommodation and restaurant experience for a limited number of visitors, and an artist-in-resident program that will enhance the town's burgeoning sculpture park. And the reason I want to bring all this up is because it seems like the Nipton of Fallout New Vegas, or whatever was left of it that was the basis for the Fallout New Vegas version, may soon not be around any longer. So if you do plan on making a trip out to New Vegas to explore some of the Fallout New Vegas locations, you might want to head to Nipton sooner rather than later.
This here's where folks go when their luck runs out. Drifters up from the Republic, locals that can't turn a dime, drunken reprobates from all around.
Now, believe it or not, Aerotech was a real place, not just in-game, but also real life. The location where it once stood is now a boring old legal office. If you want to be lame and actually pay your taxes instead of just not, then this is where you would come. But the real-life Aerotech was much cooler. They were a manufacturer offering a wide range of aircraft engine components, parts, and supplies. and this spot was their manufacturing plant, when unfortunately, it would go on to suffer a massive explosion. On October 15th of 2001, a small fire would initially start in the plant, but would very quickly be extinguished. But unfortunately, a barrel of water-soaked magnesium at the plant would later go on to erupt and explode, causing a fire that burned for more than 24 hours. The explosion and the fire would go on to kill at least one worker and injure a couple others, and costed an estimate of $12 million in damage. And what's pretty funny about this, well, not the people dying in explosions, is what happened after. Aerotech would go on to sue the fire department.
That fire caused a lot of problems, including this lawsuit that came out today. In it, Aerotech claims that Clark County, the county fire department, the fire chief individually, and 2 other fire inspectors actually caused that fire you saw in October. Take a look. It was a fire that's hard to forget. In the suit, the toy rocket company Aerotech says there were actually 2 fires that night. The first one that was quickly extinguished by the fire department.
Some 3 hours later, there was another fire. The second fire, which is the one that destroyed the building, was ignited by the contamination of powdered magnesium that was in the building with water.
And it even seems like they tried to double down and sue them again for something completely different. The lawsuit alleged that the fire department violated the company's protection against unreasonable search and seizure when investigators returned to the fire scene to collect evidence to try to determine the cause of the fire. There would later go on to be a report that described several violations of safety procedures at the plant, even including employees setting off rockets on the property. So it seems like Aerotech was up to some shady stuff. And the backlash after this from the public was pretty severe, as most people didn't really want to be near Aerotech any longer. And after criminal charges, lawsuits, Aerotech would end up scrubbing everything and moving out to Utah. So even though by the time Fallout New Vegas was being made, Aerotech was no longer a thing because of the explosion, but I still think it's pretty cool how they took a real life event and incorporated an entire area around it.
Whole place used to be some kind of rich bastard resort back before the war. Now the Rangers use the old resort and we grunts get to live in tents. Fucking typical.
I don't remember Camp Golf having this many buildings. To be fair, the game is almost 20 years old. This is completely unrecognizable. Now, given it has been 20 years, but the development in this area has apparently sprouted, and you just have infinitely new developments being built every single day. So comparing that to Vegas, it's a little different. But at the time Fallout New Vegas was being developed, and when it released in 2008, there was only a handful of resorts actually on this lake. Instead of the hundreds of possible places that you could stay here now, really the only ones that were around at the time this game was being developed were the Westin, the Reflection Bay, the Ritz-Carlton, and the Monte Lago. So I would take a really good assumption and say they just combined all of those locations and created Camp Golf, because the Camp Golf you see in game doesn't look anything like any of these resorts. The one I've seen a lot of people say is actually Camp Golf is the Reflection Bay, because it is one of the oldest and has a golf course. And that's entirely possible. But in my dumb YouTuber opinion, I think they just combined them all into one. I mean, how were they supposed to know when they created the game that you would have this amazing village, plenty of restaurants, shops, even more golf courses, believe it or not, and even a bell tower. Nice. But one thing I found while I was walking around this area was one, this awesome village that's over there. It's really nice. And two, this spot right here. Does that not look like the spot you meet Chief Hanlon in? He no here. But look, they still have his chairs. This village is really weird. It's brand new. Half the shops aren't even open yet. And there's like no one here. And it's eerily quiet. And look, a casino. This whole area, I feel like, should be way more crowded. With the amount of buildings and stuff, it's pretty dead. I mean, it's only 1 p.m. on a Friday, but I still feel like this place should be like packed. There was a golf tournament going on at the Reflection Bay, so I just saw millions of people over there, but this whole entire village area is just like a ghost town. If they make Fallout New Vegas 2 or something, this would be a pretty cool area to turn into a ghost town.
Now, Lake Las Vegas and the entire area surrounding it is vastly different in-game compared to real life. In-game, it's very, very small. You have one building and a pitiful lake, if you can even call it that. In game, it's more like a pond. But in real life, you have an entire area. Even back during the time when New Vegas was being developed, you had way more than just one building, and the lake wasn't just some itty-bitty pond. So they definitely took a lot of creative liberties with this area. Now, Lake Las Vegas actually does have a kind of interesting backstory. In 1965, a man named J. Carlton Adair ended up acquiring 160 acres on the shore of Lake Mead, well within the National Park Service's boundary. The government kind of fumbled the bag and overlooked that area, and it was never acquired by them. And Adair had planned resort development on this area, and the National Park Service wasn't having any of it. So, eventually, the government proposed an exchange. Adair would hand over all the property on the Lake Mead shoreline, and in return, he would get the area that is now known as Lake Las Vegas. And for like the next 30 years, it was kind of just like financial problems that really set it back. Trouble finding investors really delayed this until the 1990s. But once the money started rolling in, that's when development started to sprout. And throughout the early 2000s, this area would really boom. And it wouldn't take long for it to become the area that we now know it is today. And now that I'm re-looking over some of this footage, does this town area not give you like Sierra Madre vibes? Because it's totally giving me Sierra Madre vibes.
Welcome to Repconn headquarters, Rocketeer. Come all this way to see our little facility, have you?
The Repconn headquarters in Vault, New Vegas is a very real place in our world, or I should say, was. It is at the same location as Repconn, or the Pacific Engineering and Production Company of Nevada. And very similar to Aerotech, this location also suffered an explosion. It's kind of weird that Vault, New Vegas had two locations that are based off real companies that both suffered an explosion and are no longer around in those areas. Like there just must be a curse in this area that's doomed to cause an explosion every now and then. But Repconn was a chemical plant in Henderson, Nevada, and at the time was one of only 2 American producers of ammonium perchlorate, or AP. And essentially what this did was make explosions or boom booms more powerful. And this AP was heavily used in rockets, mainly the space shuttle boosters. So this company made AP, and they would give it to NASA so that way they could keep sending rocket ships up. And everything was hunky-dory until the 1986 Challenger disaster, which, if you don't know what that is, we don't have all day to keep diving back into history, but a space shuttle went up, exploded, and killed everybody that was on board. After this, NASA was like, alright, we need to slow some things down and figure out what we're doing wrong. So they weren't sending as many space shuttles up into the air, thus using less rockets, thus not needing as much AP. So Repconn ended up having more stockpiles than usual of AP, something that they were not used to but also not prepared for. And this would all come to bite them in the ass on May 4th, 1988, when a couple of guys who were up to no good were trying to fix a fiberglass structure by using a welding torch on it. Now, they thought that they were in a safe enough distance from the AP, and they had watered it down to try to get rid of any of the AP dust that might still be on the surface. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The welding sparks ended up igniting the fiberglass. And because of all the AP dust that was literally everywhere, the fire would get worse and worse until it was uncontrollable, causing the site to be evacuated. And eventually the fire would reach the large stockpiles of AP, causing 2 catastrophic explosions that not only destroyed the entire plant, but also the surrounding areas, and even registered as a magnitude 3.5 earthquake. Now, an explosion like this ended up causing 2 fatalities and injuring almost 400 people, and costing an estimate of around $100 million of damage. And of course, after all of this, people started doing investigations as to what caused this explosion. And it really came down to 2 theories. 1, that a gas line underneath caused the fire, and 2, that the welding torches caused the fire. And of course, Repconn tried to take no responsibility and was like, yo, it was that gas line that's not ours, they did it. Of course, no one is going to believe that, and after a couple courtroom battles, they ended up having to pay $71 million in damages, which is around $142 million today. Now, that location today is nothing but a bunch of office parks and boring stuff, and the actual company Repconn ended up dipping out, very similar to Aerotech to Utah. So So attempting to walk around that location today, you would probably never notice that one of the worst explosions ever had actually happened here. You would just see a bunch of boring office stuff. But when you actually know the history, it hits a little different.
The Crimson Caravan Company has been in business for over 130 years. We're partially responsible for the progress in the NCR.
Now, I'm gonna make this one quick, because it's about to pour down rain. But behind me, it may not look like it, but this is actually the Crimson Caravan. All right, editing me is gonna have to take over. It's starting to rain, and it's getting really windy. And there's lightning, and I'm scared. Do you hear that wind? My God.
Now, for this one, I can take no credit for this whatsoever. The real credit again goes to the website The Lucky 13 Kate. I would have never been able to make this connection. So again, shout out to her and that website. Check it out, links down there below in the description. But the Crimson Caravan roughly sits at around the same location as the Broadacres Marketplace, which is a huge flea market with a vast array of tented vendors, food spots, and live music on the weekends. Now, unfortunately, they're not open all the time. They're only open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and for a limited amount of time. And I was wanting to stay till they opened and check it all out and see what kind of stuff they had, but it started pouring down rain, so unfortunately, I was unable to. But from the pictures that I see online, this place looks amazing. But going back in time a little bit, the Broadacre Marketplace can trace its roots back to 1977, where a family by the name of the Bowmans were just regular vendors themselves, opening the Broadacres Swap Meet as a place to sell their produce. And slowly it would start growing, and they ended up buying additional land, and soon the Broadacres would grow up to 20 acres by the time they sold it to the Dance family in October of 2007. And with that, it would officially become the Broadacres Marketplace. And I think it's pretty fitting that one of the largest trading companies in New California in the Fallout universe happens to be located at a ginormous flea market. So whether this was the actual inspiration for the location of the Crimson Caravan, or it just happens to be a coincidence, that I don't know. But I will say, if it is a coincidence, it's a pretty damn good one. But I like to think that they saw this really cool flea market and decided that something needs to go here in the game.
Those howitzers of ours aren't just for entertainment, child. Explosive ordnance is what keeps the savages at a distance. Except you.
Nellis in real life is very similar to its Fallout New Vegas counterpart, in that it's very difficult to get in. And honestly, the real world counterpart might be a little bit more difficult. In the game, you just have to dodge a bunch of bombs on your way in, or make your way through a train tunnel. And I'd rather do that than have to go through paperwork. To get into the real Nellis, you're going to need someone to sponsor you, or you're going to have to actually be a military member of Nellis, considering that this is still an active military base. So you would need someone on the inside to basically say, hey, this guy's cool, and go through all the paperwork for that. Or I believe there is a way to do it without having a sponsor, but again, you would also have to get a temporary pass and go through a bunch of paperwork and have IDs, which I did not have the time nor all the documents to do. So instead of going inside Nellis, I just get to look at it from the outside. And from what I can see from various pictures online, they did a pretty good job recreating Nellis. I mean, even the welcome signs from the game in real life are pretty spot on. And of course, you're going to have the hangars, the airplanes that are inside them, and of course the air control tower. But the real version also does have its own solar panel array. And to top it all off, to show you how close these things are, there even is a real museum at Nellis. In the real world, it's called the Air Force Thunderbirds Museum. That, very similar to the New Vegas version, also has a huge mural. So now saying all that, let's get into the history of Nellis. The origins can kind of be traced back to right after World War I, but the Nellis that we know it of really started to pop up around World War II. And it began its life around 1941 as the Las Vegas Army Airfield, and is exactly what you think it is. It was an airfield used to train pilots for combat, and this base would eventually become Nellis in the 1950s. It would be renamed Nellis Air Force Base in honor of Lieutenant William Harold Nellis, who was a local fighter pilot from Nevada who was shot down during the Battle of the Bulge. And the name would just stick, and the base's identity became tightly tied to fighter aviation. Now during the Cold War, that's when things really started to heat up. Nellis started to transform into the US's Air Force's premier home for advanced training. And Nellis would also go on to become the home of the US Air Force Thunderbirds, an elite aerial demonstration team known for their precision flying and showcasing American air power. Now in modern times, Nellis is still pretty much doing what it's always done. It runs advanced air combat schools, has large-scale joint exercises, and is involved in testing and tactics development for cutting-edge aircraft. such as the F-22 and F-35s, and everything that comes after that. So essentially, Nellis is one of the key components of fighter aviation when it comes to the United States. So maybe one day I'll get a sponsor and I'll be able to check all this from the inside and not just the outside. And if you were wanting to also check this out, definitely do not try to sneak in. Instead of them shooting bombs at you, they're just gonna take you out. I don't think they're gonna play around like that. So that is where, unfortunately, this video must come to an end. So far, what has been your favorite location that I visited in this video? And if you didn't see one that you were expecting to, make sure to check out my previous one. We went over even more and more of the mainstream ones. A link to that will be down below in the description. And lastly, hopefully you guys have a great day. That's all I got. Leave.